Welcome to the Silver Room, our first Silver Room of 2026. My name is Julie Elise Landry, and I am so excited. I've really missed listening to these readers since our last broadcast in December. Today, we are going to hear from Ben Fluet and Tarius Montayj Jones, two exceptional writers, though I suspect they will be equally exceptional readers. If you have been following Silver Room, you know how this goes. We'll hear from each author, then I'll interview them one by one, and we'll end with some questions for the group. Ben, Tarius, are y'all ready? Fantastic. Ben Fluet is a queer poet and filmmaker living in New Orleans. He is currently the graduate editor at the University of New Orleans Press and a reader for Bayou Magazine. In 2022, Ben hand-bound and self-published his debut chapbook, How We Forgot to Sing. In 2020, he directed Meet Me by the Magnolia Tree, a documentary exploring the history of gay men's lives in Richmond, Virginia, which aired on PBS and featured on Virginia Public Media. His recent writing appears in Otis, Nebula, and Trampoline. Get us started, Ben.
Hello. All right, this first poem is called Heaven is a Laundromat. 1. And when the Lord comes, taking me swiftly, I'll tell him I'm awake, ready to go home, and I'll surrender my soul completely this time. And if I can check a bag on the flight to heaven, I'll stuff it full of dirty laundry and wash my clothes on a cloud. Yeah, maybe that'll be my salvation. The soul that I wear outside over my skin like a tattered rag on this kitchen sink, and then will come the rattling of appliances high above, echoing as thunder to earth. 2. And when it rains, say you're sorry. Make your instinct to survive. Be the tea you stole a talisman from your lover's pantry, shoved in your back pocket. And just now you remember the part with the tea and your clothes in that washing machine up above. But just think about your freshly steeped pants that smell like chamomile and detergent still touching your thighs in a way that only he could come close. Come close to me and remember me in that way, please. I got two more. This one is a little shorty. It's called Trigger Discipline. I once held a gun too tightly. Then comes the point it part, the shoot it part, then the recoil that sends my body's echo sinking. I needed a hymnal for those things I hunted, those moose and caribou. Just like boys, I shoot my shot and apathy leaves a bullet wound. I am both hunter and hunted, those wild animals, just identical ripples in different pools. Thanks for having me read, Julie. It's really fun to be able to do this on a couch. I love when I don't have to leave my home and I can just not wear shoes and socks and be comfy with my dog. This is my last poem. It's called Voicemail, Human Resources. 9:30 a.m. Monday. Transcription auto-generated by Facilities IT. Caller ID HR 6669. Hi, this is the Human Resources Office. I'm calling about some concerns raised by colleagues regarding the third floor men's bathroom in Annex B East Elevator Bank, the one with the flickering light and the lemon cleaner smell. Apparently, you've been seen conducting extracurricular mentorship through the far right stall, the one with the broken latch you hold shut with your foot. We're told there's a 5-inch wide aperture in that partition, mid-thigh level, approximately where the ADA poster says wash your hands for 20 seconds. Couple clarifying questions, purely procedural. Is there any understall choreography we should be aware of? Left foot tap, right foot tap, inquiry, reply. Does the left stall remain for initiating and the right for receiving, or have those roles moved since the repainting last quarter? Maintenance says the cock line never truly set. Also, time windows. Our cameras show a lull between janitorial sweeps at 10:15 to 10:27 and 3:40 to 3:52. Is that when the community outreach occurs? We asked because safety has started logging loiter times. No judgment, just trying to calendar the risk. Dress code, please avoid the steel toe company boots, tiles unforgiving on the knees. If you must, facilities recommends contractor pads signed out at the cage, Form 19 knee. Speaking of forms, if this is a wellness initiative, we will need to code it as holistic moral support so it aligns with the strategic plan. You should also know some staff use the phrase blowing up the spot. We discourage that idiom and the practice it describes. Consider signage quiet enjoyment of premises. Perhaps a tasteful printed guide, left foot tap versus right foot tap. Work badge facing inward or outward. Pro tip about not wearing your branded fleece during community engagement. To the larger point, several employees feel there's inequitable access to stall 3. Equity is key. We're exploring a rotating schedule or possibly a shared calendar, color-coded, red for restricted, blue for open collaboration. IT says we can integrate with Outlook. Legal says no. None of this is disciplinary, yet we value initiative and team spirit. Still, a reminder, Annex B, third floor bathroom, is a workplace, not a pilot program, and civic intimacy. Please keep activities to posted hours, respect housekeeping, wipe down surfaces, and for the love of compliance, do not widen the aperture with your keys. Any questions, call me back. If I do not pick up, leave a message with my cell phone number listed above the aperture in the stall, and whether today's configuration is left, right, or discrete urinal glancing. We'd like to support you responsibly. Thank you for your attention to culture, safety, and the ongoing project of human resources. Please do not reply all. Thanks, y'all.
For the love of compliance, thank you so much for that reading, Ben. I can't wait to talk to you about those poems. But for now, we are going to turn to our second reader, Tarius. Tarius Montayj Jones is a professor at Prairie View A&M University who is dedicated to building a legacy in education and writing. He was featured in the 50th issue of Ellipsis, a journal of art, ideas, and literature, for The Sound of a Good Man, which also came in as second runner-up in the Samuel Mockbee Prize in Nonfiction 2025. The Sound of a Good Man is part of his upcoming memoir, tentatively titled The Other Side of the Tracks. His Twitter feed, the first of his four-part indagation, focuses on the injustices of the plea bargaining system. The other three planned parts are creative nonfiction work, podcast, and eventually documentary over plea bargaining. Tarius holds a bachelor's and master's in English from Texas Southern University and is currently in a low residency MFA for creative nonfiction at the University of New Orleans. He has been accepted into Texas Southern University's Executive Master's Program in Public Administration beginning June 2026. Transport us, Tarius, please.
All right, thank you. All right, and the story that I'm going to read is a nonfiction piece, and it's actually the introduction to my thesis. And this piece is entitled Medea and the Room. All right, and then the first subtitle of this is called The Railroad Tracks Along Santa Fe. The railroad tracks ran east-west along Santa Fe and north-south, tracing the edges of Park Place until that road cut off just before reaching downtown, circling into Avenue E rather than dissolving into a dead end. In the north-south direction, they first touched parts of the North Fraser exit, but each flowing track intersected on Main Street because North Fraser came to a Y intersection. Fraser continuing to the left and Main Street to the right. Main Street then sandwiched the north-south tracks with Park Place, and that is where Duggan, Texas was found. These railroad tracks became rooted in the county's topography and were most likely laid by agricultural and prison laborers, those fellows recognized as politically illegal criminals. They were made of carbon steel and had this rusty, dark brown copper color that lined them for miles and miles beyond the Duggan neighborhood. Sometimes a kid would place a quarter or a penny on the track when a train came so the coins could be flattened. Both intersecting both intersecting tracks formed a box around the main entrances to Duggan, an almost imaginary line but with clear racial and class boundaries. The social environment designed within that box matched the criminal disorders of how Dugganites were expected to behave violently, drug dealing, and different forms of thievery. Behaviors that were part of the crab in a bucket principle. Juvenile minds of Duggan were meant to be entrapped, their behavior controlled before they were even aware of the process. And because of the bucket, the ghetto was so unnatural to the crab or the child, each one pulled the other down if it tried to escape, sometimes unconsciously. And even though that box formed by the railroad tracks could easily be physically crossed, the box separated people who were political outcasts from the other people of society, the ones who controlled the ebb and flow of external stimuli that influenced their behaviors. The 1980s was a decade of epidemics: crack, gangster rap, single family households, gang life, rapidly spreading diseases that infected the brains of children as young as 7, running the streets, breaking windows, throwing rocks at cars, disrespecting adults, stealing bikes, climbing into windows in search of items that belong to someone else. When an impressionable environment is boxed in by railroad tracks, it operates like a conscious human being. Its primary goal is to manipulate kids, especially a group of cousins growing up on an East Avenue G Street in Duggan, not separated by too many years, out of our youthful innocence. Luckily, our grandmother had a way to tame that manipulation. Next subtitle is The Room. Daddy and Mudill's room was the second largest in the house. And just like any room, it depicted the conflict and realities of life, the harmony of a well-knit family, the visual of a happy childhood. The room was also a perfect representation of punishment. And Mudill had a special way of disciplining us by using their bedroom to issue out her own version of in-house detention, except hers was designed specifically for rehabilitation. Whenever my cousins or I would act out, instead of spanking us, the alternative would be for the perpetrator to spend designated time on bedroom lockdown. As for me, I ended up in the room with my older cousin Brandon more than I would have liked, which irritated me more than the punishment. It was an early Sunday morning. We were in the den playing the game of Duck, Duck, Goose. Nikki, Brandon, Tawana, Kia, Lante, Kendra, and myself, running around the circle of chairs we'd set up, shouting, laughing, panting. At one point, Brandon and I ran into each other and fell through the glass coffee table. I remember closing my eyes, squeezing them shut, waiting for the pain to overtake my body, waiting for the open wounds to pour out liquid lifeline from my young body. It had only been maybe 15 seconds, but seemed like years. When I opened my eyes to find myself unharmed, somehow we survived the crash without spilling blood. After checking ourselves for scratches, we laughed until we saw Mudill standing in the doorway in her light blue gown with a brown extension cord in her hand. What on God's green earth? I feared the extension cord more than I had the fall. Its long braided wires that harnessed the sting of 30 bumblebees as it whipped through the air. Never being punished with one, but aware of the stories, I embraced myself for the worst possible pain. Everyone went into a panic, mentally preparing their story to avoid the sting of the extension cord. Mudill, I failed, Brandon said as a reflex. Now look at this. You kids done gone and broke the glass on the coffee table. You know how hard it's gonna be to replace this. Lante hid behind the couch. Nikki stood frozen, eyes wide. Kia and Tawana sat down on the floor and pulled their knees close, while Kendra crouched beside the heater. I told y'all to quit that horse playing, Mudill continued. Now look at this mess. It wasn't me, Mudill. Lante kind of whimpered out from behind the couch. She stretched her neck to see where the voice came from. Boy, get up from behind that couch. We failed, Mudill. We wasn't playing, Brandon lied. Quit telling those fibs and get up from there. I hurt my elbow, I said, hoping to gain sympathy as she rolled the extension cord up. That was a good sign. If you quit that harsh plan, you won't get hurt. Hurry up and get on up. I'm trying to rest, and every 5 minutes, y'all knocking something over. We didn't try to break it. Lante, who was now sitting Indian style on the floor next to Kia, said, "Can clean this mess up right now." Afraid of the extension cord pulsing in Madia's hands, everybody helped clean up the broken glass, although she only spoke to Brandon and me. She waited until we finished. "Come on, come into the room." I don't think nobody hated going into the room as much as Brandon, and he showed his aggravation by stomping past Madia. "Golly," he mumbled. The kitchen light was off, so the shadows gave Madia a domineering appearance, although she was soft and precious, even when she was mad. Even when she clutched onto an extension cord she had no intentions of using. "Quit that mumbling before I give you something to mumble about, boy," she warned, "and walk right." He straightened up and led the way into the room. When we wanted to talk to Madia or Daddy, watch the stories, or when they were relaxing, it was the room lowercase. But when it became the location for punishment, it was the room capitalized, a synonym for in-house confinement, as Madia transformed into the strict but loving keeper of the castle. The time we had to remain in the room varied depending on the crime. For instance, fighting with a family member resulted in a 2-hour stay. Yelling too loudly after being told to quiet down multiple times meant a 30-minute stay. Using cuss words ranged from 30 minutes to an hour, but that was rare as we had too much respect to cuss around adults. Breaking something by accident usually meant an hour stay, but since it had been the glass coffee table, the sentence doubled. Because Madia and Daddy were in rest mode, the television was off, which always made the stay longer and harsher. She told us to sit down and be quiet until our time was up and to take care not to wake Daddy. We sat on the chest and our countdown began. Now, what made me hate going on lockdown with Brandon is his inability to sit still. After a short period, he would always get up and pace the floor, back and forth, with his hands behind his back, looking down, face frowned up, while he mumbled almost inaudibly. This time proved no different. "Sit down," I told Brandon, because I knew what was about to happen, or what was already happening. More time was being added each time he paced back and forth. "Keep pacing and you'll be in here longer," Madia warned. Brandon seemed not to take heed even after she said, "You just got 30 extra minutes added to your punishment." It upset me to hear those words. They fumbled around my head, each giving its own life, its own meaning. "You just got 30 extra minutes added to your punishment." Takers of playtime. "Madia, since he the one pacing, can it just be him this time?" "No," she replied. "You get in trouble together, you get punished together. And that means that what one of you do while you in here is like you're both doing it." "Sit down," I urged Brandon once again. The time felt like an entire day. We'd been in there for 3 hours due to Brandon's constant pacing back and forth with his head down and continuous mumbling of something that was incoherent. And only because Madia grew tired of Brandon's pacing did we get our release papers as soon as we did. I went into the room many times before that and many times after, but that time is the one that stands out the most. I don't know if it had been Madia's aim to keep us out of the system, but the room had worked its magic on me for whatever purpose it was supposed to serve, for whatever it was designed to protect us against in the environment, even if that purpose took years to be realized. That time did something to me psychologically. It gave birth to my fear of enclosure, my fear of ever going to jail, but it did not dawn on me that Madia was teaching about that environmental prison as well. At that time, my only connection to a jail cell had been from watching movies such as Penitentiary, or from watching television shows such as Hunter, and from songs such as Sam Cooke's Chain Gang. The room did what television could not, by physically depicting the loss of breadth and freedom one experiences in confinement. One thing I took from those room punishments is that jail was no place for a human. And although I couldn't stay out of trouble because trouble as a kid also meant having fun, I knew jail was a place I never wanted to go, nor a place I would ever get used to physically or mentally. And the last sub heading is called Released. When the door opened to let us out, Brandon remained mad, but for me, it was like walking into a rainbow. The door didn't even creak, but I can still hear echoes of creaking sounds. Sounds of a wooden door transforming into a rusting steel door, hinges that could benefit from a dab of WD-40. Sounds that faded in and faded out like a bad horror movie, throwing creaking sounds through the television screen and speaker. The hallway seemed to let out a breath like, finally. It was like the hallway handed me a warm cup of hot cocoa after coming in from the cold, snowy weather that decided not to bypass Texas that one year. The room was the heart of winter. The opening door, after nearly 4 monotonous hours, laid out a brick road back to the room, back to, well, the lowercase room, back to a beautiful brightness. Madil went from the quiet, hard staring warden to being Granny again, the beautiful wife and grandmama, the family driven, friendly, soft spoken Jones matriarch. She smiled. Y'all can go now. Thank you, Madil, I said, and rushed to give her a hug, relieved as much as a bluebonnet growing in the summer under 20 straight days without rain. Brandon mumbled the same but threw in a about time, but I don't think Madil heard. I walked outside and stared into the sunny blue sky, feeling the sun rays of yellow freedom wash my face of confinement. The sun was warm, very warm. Brandon picked up a few rocks from the driveway and tossed them into the pecan tree across the street. I climbed on top of the roof of my grandparents' house and just sat there, reflecting on the room, capitalized, reflecting on the darkness inside and the open sky outside, reflecting on strategies to avoid going inside the room again with Brandon, a reflection that's usually interrupted by the blasting horn of a train. And that is where this story ends.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It is so intimate and meaningful, and I really cannot wait to talk to you about it. I would love to jump in and discuss it right now, but I'm going to keep to my format and I'm going to chat with Ben first. So, Ben, these poems that you read are exciting as hell. The voicemail poem in particular absolutely delighted me with its formal, sterilized language, playing off of the erotic subject matter. Because you and I are both in our last semester, we're both doing heavy revisions right now. Talk to me about your revision process and specifically how you've approached revisions to that voicemail poem. How has it evolved? Have you had to wrestle with it, or has it been a cooperative poem?
Um, gosh, that poem started as like a little like prose block. Like it was super short and I I kind of like it came out of this idea that like Chasten Buttigieg was like working for HR and really wanted to be like in the know with what the gays were doing in the office. And so he was the hardest part about that poem is like trying to convey the formality of like a dude working for HR, but also a dude who's working for HR that wants to also suck dick like in the bathroom. And so he's trying to like get the, like a couple clarifying questions, purely procedural, and trying to like get I don't know, it's like layered like satire. So it was really difficult to try and like do that, but I kind of had to blow it up. And so it started really short, but now it's like it's really massive.
That's fantastic. I love to hear about the evolution of writing, especially poems. And I don't know. I just love hearing the story of how that idea came to you and how you've evolved on it. One thing that I also always adore in your poetry specifically is the way it actively moves through real-time construction of the speaker's identity, this fluid sense of evolving selfhood. And here I'm really thinking about the second poem that you read with like the hunting and everything about that. How are you working with identity in your poetry, with voice and language and structure as supporting the development of identity? What problems do you feel like you're trying to solve through the exploration of identity in your writing?
I think I'm not actually like trying to solve any sort of like problem with identity. I think like I like the idea of poetry being a way to mingle like with the confusion of the self like on the page. And I try and do that through like really recursive language and like really kind of like non-crystalline lyric that just like has so many ways out of trying to look at an image and like you supply like the meaning for it, you know? And I think that language is like, and especially poetry is a really great way to be able to kind of accomplish that task of like trying to syntactically reflect the sort of messiness of what it is to be like a human and all those like tidy boxes that we try and put ourselves in that we call categories and like identities, and how it's just like it's all fluid, you know? And I think I've always felt really confused about like everything. Like nothing makes sense to me. And so like I like poetry because like to me it's a really uh I like writing poetry and constructing really like deliberate and like intricate poetry because it feels like a really great way to like, use language to say what we can't understand, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I see that happening in your work, and I think that exploration of like the complication of a person and the unsayableness of a person, it's absolutely evident in what you write, and I really appreciate it. My last direct question for you is going to be about fragmentation, because it has to be about fragmentation, because I know you have big feelings about fragmentation. When does a poem call for capital letters versus none, for punctuation versus none? How are you navigating all these little different choices and options when you're drafting and revising?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I've been thinking about all this so much because of like constructing the preface to my thesis this semester. Um, I think that like the formal choice of eschewing proper grammar and punctuation and, eschewing the expectations of what like a sentence looks like. Um, for me, it happens kind of solely off of instinct. I don't really know if there's like a methodology that I have like in my head for it. I think, I try and approach poems from every different angle, especially with, going back to your question about revision. I try and like turn it into prose, or not like prose, but I try and unlineate poems when I'm like revising them and just kind of letting each line like go all the way across the page, like, and it not being lineated or not being enjambed or whatever. And I think that then I'll, see that and be like, well, if I'm not making sense here, how can I like cut it, you know? And then like I think when I work with like lyrical fragments specifically, it makes just like instinctual sense to me to not capitalize or like punctuate anything because I like writing fragmentation because you can arrange your sentence like when you're reading it however you want to. And so I think when you don't have the barrier of like a comma or a hyphen or a period and you don't have a capital letter that's going to be your signal that there's something new or something proper, then it just gives you so many different maps of how you can like read a sentence. Thanks for these questions, Julie. That was fun.
I'm not done with you yet. We're gonna have some more questions when we talk to everybody. But I do want to just circle back to one thing you said about like moving on instinct. And what I love is that even when we're acting on instinct, it's an informed instinct, right? Even if it's not a conscious methodology, there's an unconscious methodology to what we're doing. And I think what's so wonderful about being in this MFA program is the opportunity to slowly try and figure out, can we make the unconscious methodology conscious? Can we figure out what it is that's ruling those instincts? And so I think it's a really cool thing to explore and talk about. But I also know that Ben and I have a lot of enthusiasm, and we will keep talking until the end of time if I don't stop us. We are loquacious, as Carolyn Hembry always says. But I need to ask Tarius some questions about this fantastic piece of memoir that he's shared with us. I know, I can tell from your story, Tarius, that you are someone who believes that context matters, that it is necessary to establish common ground before communication can begin. The structure of your story follows a sort of top-down organization where we start broad with an establishment of place and then narrow down in on one family, one room, even as you're using the microcosm of that room to make commentary on the macro societal world. So my first question for you is, why for you are stories and nonfiction stories more persuasive than other forms of communication? And what role does context tend to play in your writing?
I probably think nonfiction is, as far as specifically for me, is a better form of communication. Um, when I think about me and like trying to have like this mesh between entertainment and education, right? And because I kind of take education serious, so and of course, poetry is it's educational fiction as well. Um, but I think as I've grown older, that I look more into like the nonfiction, the reality, and like the real stories and what's happening to people, and why it's happening to people, and specifically like they call structural functionalism, like the things that kind of lead people to behave how they behave. What was the second question? Part of that?
Context, which I think you've already sort of touched on a little bit, but seeing that again with
Oh,
the way you structured that story, it's
okay.
baked in that you want to lead
Yeah.
someone
Oh,
up.
yes, the context. So the context, and basically what I'm doing with my thesis, because at first it was going to be called The Other Side of Town, and then I changed it to The Other Side of the Tracks because it became more appropriate in my redoing while I've been doing my revisions, um, because I came up with a theme. And so the theme of the entire thing is going to be environmental slavery. So I have to start. So that's why I start with the how the train tracks, the east-west flowing and the north-south, how they kind of like box in the neighborhood that I'm in. And because right across the tracks, on the east-west side is because I'm from a small town, so that's the downtown where you have the courthouse and all of that, and the newspaper, the Courier. So it's almost like an immediate, like you can see like some immediate uh, contrast and discrepancies in like structures. Like now, well now they have sidewalks now, but when I was growing up, there wasn't no sidewalk until you cross the tracks. Stuff like that. And basically, the environmental slavery is looking at basically what I'm doing is describing the environment as a human. So I personify the environment, and I personify the environment as a psychopath and a sociopath. So for me, the environment is like this psychosociopath, and kind of so it don't really have a conscience, but it's based on and based on a lot of different things from society, um, such as remnants of Jim Crow. Because I mean, when I was born, it was only 13 years um, after the Loving versus Virginia decision, um, and then I grew up in the '80s, so I grew up, you know, during the war on drugs and seeing all of this, um, being conflicted with all of this because I was, um, these are people that I was looking up to. Um, so anyway, so it's all going to be more like kind of educational.
No, I mean, that leads right into the sort of the next question that I had for you, which is the voice in this story seems incredibly concerned with these ideas of fairness, unfairness, justice. It asks questions about whether or not we should be held responsible for other people's actions and how we
Mhm.
can be prepared for a world that will inevitably make us suffer for what other people do. How do you think families raising children should approach these issues? How do writing stories, memoirs help us sort through these like nuanced subjects and these things that are hard to move forward with?
It is like growing up where I grew up from. It's difficult because you kind of had both. You had single parent households, you had two parent households, but then you also had single parent households that were labeled as single parent households, but you had the mother active, the father was active, but they were not living together. Um, what's the question?
Yeah, no, sorry. I tend to talk a little bit too much, I think, when I'm asking these questions. How do you think families raising children should like
Oh,
approach some of these issues?
oh, oh, yeah, okay. And what I was saying is, and it basically, I think it just going to depend on the family, on the child, what type of punishment um, that is required, and how they raise them, what they do for them. Um, because I say like for me, um, because I got whoopings, and a lot of people are against whoopings, but I'm not, because I know me and when I was a kid and the environment that was influencing me. Because I'm growing up during um, the crack epidemic. Gangster rap came out, so you got all of this. These are two huge influences, and it's real easy, especially for a young kid, to get caught up in like the glamour of it without understanding the consequences of it. So for me, I think like the whoopings, or there's something that I needed more than like grounding, because grounding wouldn't have really done anything for me. But I think that's what eventually took a long time, but eventually got me on track. Because I think I actually not think, I know without them, I would have probably been worse than what I was. Um, and what and that's what my grandmother was doing. So my dear, she would, they would whoop us, but they were older, so the whoopings didn't hurt from them. So sometimes we would just like pretend to cry. Um, but it was the room punishment. I think that was um, the probably the most important punishment, because it wasn't no physical abuse, and it was a different form of punishment. And I know the lessons what she was trying to teach us, um, basically to get our behavior right. And I think it was more than stay out of um, jail. It was also trying to keep us from like the prison type environment. I mean, the prison type system of the environment.
So based on exactly what you just said, in addition to being very broadly meaningful, societally meaningful, your story also feels very individually meaningful, painting a beautiful portrait of a complex person, this woman, this grandmother who contains multitudes. And I was wondering, I know you said in your footnotes on your story that you interviewed family members as
Yeah.
part of writing it, to get,
Hmm.
dialogue and things like that. And I was wondering what responsibility you feel you have to the whole truth of your family, to your personal history, and to documenting and sharing all that knowledge.
Um, I don't know. I was like kind of cursed with being creative, so that's one. um, but when my grandmother died, I was only 7. So I hadn't I was it was in 87, so I hadn't turned 8 yet. So with her, I remember a lot, but I don't remember as much as my older cousins. Um, so I always and my mother and my aunt. So I have to talk to them to get a picture, like a full picture and a full scope of the things that I don't remember, or also things that I do remember, but I may not remember everything that happened or certain things, type of dialogue that was said, for instance. And like I knew, see, when I was starting the thesis, I already knew I was going to start off with that story. So the introduction part came later during revisions with the railroad tracks and when I added the environmental slavery. Um, because this was like my first death that I experienced, and I was young. Um, and Let me see. It was like the first death I experienced, and I was young, so I didn't have, like, I guess, like that time with my deal, like some of my other older cousins had. Um, and basically, she's like, well, I just think the mother, like the grandmother, is like pretty much the backbone to our community. And so if you end up reading the thesis, you'll see, like, so pretty much after that, um, the next story, well, I do like uh, interlude. 'Cause I got the interludes in there because I'm heavily influenced by music. And then the story after that is Uprooted, and right after that's when she died, which was that same year, February. It was actually on Valentine's Day, and so slowly from there, um, the family. So I guess it's kind of like trying to connect how our family slowly. It was like real slow process, but it slowly started to fracture after Mother passed. And like just in the community, like with other families that I know, it's like the same thing. Like when the grandmother dies, like everything starts to slowly, well, some faster, but everything, or and then others slowly. The family starts to fragment more. And if the family fragments, the community fragments.
Well, I'm glad especially with that anniversary coming up so soon, that you were able to commemorate her in this way at this time. So thank you again for sharing that. I
You're welcome.
think I think my favorite part of Silver Room so far has been seeing where, whoever my two readers are, where they overlap, seeing what lines of connection I can draw between what they are reading. And with you two, the voicemail poem and the memoir have something critical in common. They are both pushing
That last point was so good.
so good. Uh, but both of them, even though on the surface level, maybe people wouldn't think these two things have anything in common, but they are both pushing back against the various ways in which society dehumanizes people, the way society reduces people, limits and cages people. And I would love to hear from you both about your conception of how art writing demands rehumanization, demands empathy. How are each of you approaching holding our society accountable for its wrongdoings in your writing? And what tactics are you taking as a writer to push society in a better direction?
I'll go. So again, I reiterate. So now I got a lot of focus on like the war on drugs, and before the war on drugs, you had the war on poverty. But it was still in the process. Um, one more time, what was the question? Full question.
Is how do you approach holding society accountable for the things that it is doing wrong and
Okay,
push it
okay,
towards better tactics and
okay. All right.
rehumanizing people that
So yeah,
society dehumanized?
yeah. So okay, so yeah. So then like those wars, and then like I look at my individual stories, like each individual stories as like me going through a war zone, right? So I have to become a soldier. So it's like it's about survival. So it's not like I'm caught up in one of those wars where like a genocide or something like that, where I have to escape, but it's like a different form of escape. So it's like kind of like a psychological war. So it's like a war that you don't see, you don't know that you need to escape. Sometimes it's something that you can't escape, and sometimes it's something that you don't see until later. Um, and what I'm trying to do is kind of, like I said, use this as an educational tool to get, I guess, really like younger people like coming up, and we're in families as like older people as well, to kind of see like why certain stuff happen, why certain behavior happen. Like one of the psychological terms I use in there is differential association theory, and the gist of that is if I'm surrounded by criminals, then I can easily learn criminal behavior, right? And so it's kind of like, how do you navigate like the outside influence and the home influence? Because you have the people in the house that you look up to and they teach you right, but then the society outside the environment is kind of doing the opposite. And kids, very impressionable, of course, they're going to listen to their parents, especially like us, like listen, like in the house, I'm real good, but like outside the house, it's a different story, because it's like the idea of like to be popular or to be smart, and that is something that really plagued the environment that I grew up in. Because I got another story in there about me dropping out of the spelling bee for that pretty much for that exact reason, because it's a lot of praise. It's less praise on education and getting good grades, and wanting to be a doctor, lawyer, or something like this, and more praise for the other stuff like sports. You're good at basketball, you're good at football, you're good at baseball, or you can sing, or you can rap. Hmm. So it's kind of like we have more options than those, right? And I look at, so I do have to, I look at like through the lens, like the historical lens of like the oppression. That's why I got like the crab in the bucket. I kind of break that down um as a in the projects, because the projects, it was a project, um, but not as something that I'm using as a crutch, something to show that, okay, even though you got all these odds stacked against you, you can still overcome it. But what I want to do is um, have younger people overcome it sooner and learn about this sooner. Because if you don't like learn and overcome like these environmental traps sooner, you may not get lucky because it's easy, real easy to mess. I mean, you mess up your life in a second.
Ben, how about you thinking about like using writing to rehumanize?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, one.
To be honest,
Let me
I
say one
think
more
like
thing. I'll say and one more ad part. Oh, because the last part I want to say was also because you're talking about the humanizing because with the war on drugs, they did label like drug dealers and people that were in the environment as demons, right? So it's more about trying to show society that we're not demons, we're not monsters. We don't need the exorcism of being arrested and going to prison to become human. We just need more encouragement and learning how to better navigate certain environments. So that's all.
um I don't know. I think that with poetry, and like art in general, it's coming from such like an internal perspective on everything that you see, and that is so subjective. And I wonder how much like impact we can actually have on like influencing anything, and like if there is even an ability to like rehumanize through art. I like to believe that by writing about transgressive shit like being an addict or like being homosexual and like doing transgressive like homosexual acts like sucking dick in like bathroom stalls or whatever, that I'm like a part of a larger like narrative of queer artists and like gay male artists specifically. um I don't know what it systematically like does for anyone, you know? I think that all I can do is just like put pen to paper and write about like my afflicted body and, hope that like it maybe does something for like someone, you know? I guess my intention like with creating is only it's completely like self-serving for me, you know? Like I write because like this is what I know how to do, and like I can't do anything else. Like I was a journalist like before this, and so it was always like some kind of like writing, but when I chose to like really dig into like poetry, then I was like, well, this is what I really care about writing, you know? So I guess to answer your question is like it's poetry in general as like a genre tends to be the most like intrinsically like empathetic, I feel like, but yeah, I don't know.
No, and I mean, if it helps you, you are part of the world. It is helping the world, right? When we are soothing ourselves, we are making ourselves better able to function and therefore just better able to be. And that is its own valid and valuable goal. So especially with poetry, I think it is and nonfiction, they're both so deeply personal and intimate and introspective. And I think even if no one else ever reads it, good work has still been done through that effort. So the last thing that I'll have us talk about, since I know we've all had a lot to say, and I don't want to hold people too much longer, but you're both, I've found, amazing at reaching back into the past and rekindling younger perspectives, which I think is something a lot of adults are not able to do anymore. A lot of times when people grow up, they're no longer able to remember how they actually thought and felt when they were younger. And you both seem able to give the younger versions of yourselves real time in your writing to be who they were and think how they thought. Thinking back to like just even a couple years ago, 10 years ago, and being faithful to the person that you were even 10 years ago. So my question is, what do you feel that you owe to your past selves? What particularly interests either or both of you in looking back?
So I had a lot of like I have a lot of PTSD that I've worked through from being like a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And so for me, I owe like that younger self the clarity of like peace, or reconciliation, like that I have with that now, that I didn't back then. Like I couldn't understand for so long, like why I was so anxious, why everything felt like catastrophic, and like, why I couldn't like take naps at preschool, or like if my mom was like 5 minutes late to pick me up, like why I would like lose my shit and feel like I was gonna be like abandoned, Um, and so now, like, thanks to therapy and like many different medications that I've gone through, like over the years, I feel a lot more like, I don't know if you ever can like recompartmentalize those like traumatized parts of yourself completely, but I think that like it's hard for it not to that nostalgia of like pain and like not being able to understand. I think it like oozes into a particular like, I think some of my poetry can be a salve for that younger self. Like there's the kind of satire, like hyper erotic poetry that I like to work in, where it's recursive and like extended clauses and stuff like that. But then there's the lyrical fragment where oftentimes I'm relying on like the logic of dreaming and like associative language to just kind of give meaning to like the things that I didn't understand for so long that hurt me so bad, Yeah, the younger self is owed so much, I think, from all of us. And I think it's important that we, heal that inner child.
I feel
And
very
for
similarly, Ben. Thank you for that. Yeah, Tarius, please.
yeah, and for me, it's well, I don't go to therapy. Writing is my therapy, though, and I'll be shorter. But I think what I owe to my younger self is to make him realize that, like all the mistakes that he made, it was more about him not being um like aware, like trying to find identity. Basically just want him to know that it's okay to make some of those mistakes, because what it did is it grew me into who I am today. So without those mistakes, I would definitely be a different person than what I am now. Right. So I want my younger self not to be like not to regret any of it, not to be embarrassed by any of it, because it's a lot. I have a lot of stories, a lot of stuff that I did. Um, and let him know to, and society know, that so you can be this person and change into this person.
Thank you both so much for those answers and for this entire conversation, which has been, I just feel like, so astounding and meaningful. And I very much appreciate the both of you spending time indoors during this very cold winter season that we are having. Um, I unfortunately do have to wrangle us into our ending, whether I like the prospect or not. So thank you again both for chatting with me today and sharing your writing. Our next
You're welcome.
Silver Room is going to be on March 1st with playwright Avi Segaloff and poet Ashley Kaspermeyer. Do not miss what those readers will inevitably offer you. Until then, see y'all out there on the silver screen, and thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Julie.